To store books, we use a dynamic array in our book repository implementation. Here, this mutable list of these 3 books. But this method is undesirable, since when the application is restarted, all information is cleared. For example, let's add a new books, Stephen Hawking, and Prisoner of Azkaban of author Beautiful Joanna Rowling. Okay, and when we will restart our application, all new books is cleared. And we can see that only 3 books is displayed, because this list consists of 3 books. And exactly for this reason, in practice, databases is used to store entities such as this book entity. So let's start simple and connect the H2 database. This is the simple, lightweight database H2. For this, we needed to add a dependency H2. Updated. From this artifact ID com H2 database. Add this dependency. This group ID com.h2 database artifact ID H2. Also, we can add a scope only runtime. This attribute means that the dependency will be available only during runtime, but will not be included in the build process compile and will not be available during testing. In test, only runtime. Synchronize Maven. And next, to connect, you needed to set the following settings in application properties. Here, settings for H2 database. And all settings must be inside Spring, this path, and data source. Spring.data source. And some information look like a username. Username must be Aslan. This is my name. And the password for connecting. Password 1234. And URL address from the same path, data source, and URL. Here you needed to specify GDBC colon H2 colon mem colon testdb. This is address for console, and the same path, Spring data source, but driver class name. Driver class name for driver. The name of this class is org.h2. We already depend this dependency, attach this dependency, and write driver. Okay. Also, we will use GPA, copy, paste, GPA dash database dash platform, and by this value we need to specify assignment statement and write by this key we needed to write some value. Org.hibernate dialect H2 dialect H2 dialect, no suggestion. So Spring without data source, Spring GPA database dialect. And after this we will not change this book repository impl, we just create another repository that will implement these functions. Let's do it. Make name a book repository impl and H2 for H2 impl. this must be firstly interface h2 repository. Okay, and we needed to extend GPA repository. So we see that this GPA repository is not exist. So we need to firstly create it. Alt insert, add dependency, and we need a dependency Spring Boot starter GPA. This is starter dependency for data and GPA. We see this first dependency, add it, Spring Boot starter GPA. We can delete a version because we have a parent node, this parent node for Spring Boot starter dependencies, and just synchronize this Maven project. And after attaching this dependency, we can open this, and we can see that this interfaces exist. Okay, so we can see from org Spring Framework data GPA repository. So we can see the T type of data and the ID field, the type of ID fields. Okay, we can see the import org Spring Framework data GPA.repository.gpa repository from this package, and we need to create an entity. We can use this book, but we can create other book entity for this purpose. Book entity, we can write entity, you can write database, you can write database model. Some programmers use this syntax, but I like to write entity because it must be marked with annotation entity. From Jakarta persistence, and just copy these fields without companion current, only fields. Copy and paste. Let's create a data class, and instead of body we use the constructor parameter, parentheses instead of curly braces. So for ID we needed to specify some annotations, persistence annotations. There is Jakarta, and we delete this logic about creation new ID, but we can add it with annotation generated value strategy identity. We will need a generated value from Jakarta persistence with the strategy. We can see the name of the class, generation type for identity, for ID. Okay, and this annotation will create a new IDs. And the fields ID, name, author, and year of publication. Okay, book entity. We created entity for this repository, and we can specify here our book entity. Book entity. This is first parameter. This generic, and ID, type of ID. We can see that ID is type long, so we can create long here. We don't specify the implementation, the body of interface, but if we, because this is interface without implementation, but if we open its implementation, we can see all methods: save for saving, for deleting, for getting, get one, find all. Method find all will return all books from database, and get by ID, we can specify ID and get a special book in the set tree. Okay, So we can rename this interface not only H2 but for GPA, and we will create a book implementation, this repository with these methods, but only for H2. And by using inversion of control, you know about inversion of control, we will attach this repository to our constructor here only by using qualifier, for example. So let's create a book repository impl for H2 database. Okay, let's mark this class as a repository. Okay, look like this, book repository. So we can use qualifier or with the value here. So let's add a value repository with the mutable list, and for attaching this repository we can use this mutable list qualifier in our controller here. Qualifier, and we can specify this mutable list. Let's copy this mutable list and here with mutable list. And if we restart our application with this mutable list, we see that the program displayed the books from this repository with the mutable list. Okay, and the program works well. Create a new book, program works. Okay, but we will add other repository and attach here other repository with the name repository repo H2, this name repo H2, and let's change repo mutable list and repo H2, and we will attach here repo H2, and this implementation will be attached to this controller. So we have a book repository. Let's implement this method, book repository. We will implement the same method but other implementation, but in this controller we don't change anything, only here these implementations. So for get all books we need this GPA that we created here, this book repository GPA. So let's GPA repo injected here by using constructor private val GPA repo, and the name it must be this book repository GPA, book repository GPA, this interface. And from this interface we will just invoke the correct methods. Return. Okay, let's change list on mutable. Oh, so we can see that this is not because list, because this model book entity. This GPA repository will return this book entity, list of these book entities, but here our book repository must will return only book method, book, these two methods. So we can just make an annotation of this entity and specify this book to this book repository here instead of book entity, but this break this logic book repository impl, and we needed to change here. So we can just create a mapper. For mapping book model to book entity for GPA. So we need just to invoke a method extension and write to this must be entity, mutable list book entity from this GPA repo, but here for this book repository it must be only book, and we can delete this book and write to model or from entity and to entity, two methods from entity and from entity list. This must be this extension function. So let's create this function. We can write it here. Function some book dot enter this from entity. This function must return a mutable list of books. If we open, we can see that this must be returned this result, mutable list of books. Okay, and if we write this inside the body of this function, we get this book. So we needed to create firstly to create a list, create only book. We'll return book from entity without list, only book, and with this method we'll return book with the next variables id from this dot id. This is object of book entity from book entity. Okay, we will return book from a book entity. ID, we can see name, author, and year. Name from this dot name, author from this dot author, and year of publication from this dot year of publication. Okay, this is from entity function, and to entity from book we needed to get book entity to entity, and we must return book entity with the same fields. Okay, and for list of mutable list of book from book to entity list. If entity, we needed to add entity this model. Okay, we can use only map. So this function will return this mutable list for getting this mutable list, and use method map with lambda expression, and for each element we needed to specify to entity extension that we write here, to entity list to entity, change to list. So this is not mutable list. We can create two mutable list. Yes, that's right. And the same method from book entity list, from entity list we will create a book to book. Okay, to from entity instead of to. Okay, and these extension functions we can use here from entity list. So here we will create a mutable list book entity, and we needed to return this entity to mutable book list from entity list. Okay, that's right. So you must understand that this is entity for storing in database, entities for storing, and this is entity for our business logic, for displaying and sending in the controller and using here. And for getting a book by ID, you know that in GPA repo, there is a method find by ID dot find by ID, and we need to specify this ID to this function return. Okay, you see that this is optional class, not a book entity, and a wrapping optional wrapper book entity, so we needed to get its value only after getting from entity. Okay, the next instruction for this GPA repository for saving, its name will only save and one entity, this book, but book entity must return this repository, but we sent a book. So firstly we need a book to entity, wrap it, mapping. After mapping book model to book entity, we save this book. And after for updating is almost similar as only save, but firstly we needed to check if update if exist, only if exist. So let's write GPA repo, use method exist by ID, exist entity by ID, you know ID, we need to firstly check exist, and only if exist we will save it. We will create a book entity from this book model to entity. Okay, and then here book entity, we need to specify ID, the correct ID from this, and just invoke method save by this ID. Save with this book with this ID. Okay, and for deleting, this is the most simple function, only delete by ID. We can delete by entity, but we send ID, and we can only specify this ID, and the Spring this GPA repository will delete this entity from database. Okay, and that's all. We create a book repository implementation of our this book repository, the name repo h2, and just specify this repo h2. And inside controller we don't need to change these functions. This program will only implement the same methods only from this implementation instead of this implementation. Let's check get all book, find all, find by ID, and from entity list. For saving, for updating if exist, then we need to firstly get existing book in a separate variable from repo with the instruction find by ID, and specify this ID and just get it. Okay, existing book, and we see that this is book entity, it has a fields, get applied fields by this apply method, and name we use from here, book.name, name, also there is an author, book.author, and year of publication from this argument, book dot year of publication. So we don't need now to create an entity from this book. We can delete it and just save this existing book. This is our way, more recommended way for updating the book. And then simple delete function. Okay. And H2 database is often used because it comes bundled with the web interface. For using its web interface, we needed to enable its web console. We needed to write this next instruction string and H2, the name of database, H2, and dot console enabled set as true, enabled true. Okay, enter the address of this enable console, h2 dot console and dot path. The path must be begin with the slash, and usually write h2 dash console. Okay, and let's restart our application. Copy this address, open our web browser, and here after localhost, just copy h2 database console. We open this database. This driver class must be org h2 driver, as we specified here. URL, we can write, for example, Hogwarts database. Let's restart it. We can change the name after mem. Open our web browser and restart this console. Yeah, must be Hogwarts database. Okay, and then our username Aslan, this is my name, and the password 1234. Aslan and the password 1234. We can connect directly or test connecting. Test successful. Okay. Write password again and connect. This open. So we can see one table with the name book entity. This is book entity because this entity class, we specified this entity but without table name. And the book entity, he must he capture this name and book separated by underscore entity. So we can change table name. Name of table books. I like books. Okay, this version. Restart our application. Okay, and then let's open our H2 console again. Okay, check this Hogwarts database driver class, username and the password. Connect. And we can see books because we change the books, the name of table. Okay, and we can write some SQL request for getting all books from our table. Books. Run, and we can see that there isn't books. So let's open our web console, localhost regular, and we can see there isn't books. So we can create a book. Stephen Hawking, create a new book. Okay, and we can see one book. So let's run it again. 2 times. We write it 2 times. Okay, and these 3 books with ID 1, 2, 3 auto-generated ID, because we specified it here as generated value strategy ID, generation type. We can try to delete or delete these 3 books, but we can see program now deleted and edit the error of ID 28, but 1, 2, 3 only. 28. Why it's back? It's back because here when we edit it, we send the model here of creation this book, but this book ID generated automatically. Okay, it need be changed. So let's add without ID here. We see ID by default 0, but name author and with the year. Name, author, and year 2020. Okay, and open our model and delete. Changing ID. Stop our application and start it. Then open our browser, refresh. Okay, we see empty 2020 with empty fields, and let's create a book. For example, 2000 Leagues Under the Sea, the author Jules Verne. Create a book. We can see this book created, and let's create other book. For example, Around the World in 80 Days. Okay, and delete this. We can see the program works. It works from this console. H2 database 1, 2, 3, 4 connect. And now if we open from books, select request, we can see then 2000 Leagues Under the Sea. Okay, Jules Verne, 2000 Leagues Under the Sea. Let's edit it, change the date, for example. The book not yet be published. Okay, 2024. And now if we restart it, we can see the new address. Okay, and let's change the author. Or we can create a new book, A Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking. And let's run this request, and we can see A Brief History of Time. This book is added. Now the same logic, but with using H2 database. For this, remember steps. Firstly, we need to attach to dependency from boot starter GPA, Java Persistence IP, and H2 database itself. After this, we needed to create a new entity, or just mark the existed model with the annotation entity. Also, we can specify the table name. This needs for these books the table name. Okay, ID is specified ID annotation and generated ID with strategy identity for generated new IDs instead of this manually logic. After mapping, if we create a new entity and then create a implementation of this repository implementation for H2. For its work, we needed to specify this book repository GPA as an extension of GPA repository. We need to only specify the entity, the model, and the type of ID. And this implementation itself will create the implementations of these popular most used methods. We just invoked it from our repository and give it name repo h2, and in our controller just specify this new name as a qualifier, this name for repo, and don't change anything. The program must work well, as we can see in this website. Okay, so good job, and see you in the next lesson.